Happy Tuesday. Today, similar to yesterday, we're going to be talking about using rules, but today we're going to be using them for multiplication. So let's start with our I can statement. I can multiply integers using the multiplication rules. So what we want to be able to do is look at a multiplication problem and figure out whether it'll be negative or positive based upon our rules, and that'll help us check our work. So let's look at this table we have here. It says that we can find out the outcome of a product by looking at how many negatives there are. So I'm going to get us started and let's see if we can find a pattern. So let's think about if we have no negatives. So we're just going to do 1 times 1, which equals 1. So if we have 0 negatives, our outcome is going to be positive. So now let's look at negative 1 times 1. That equals negative 1. So whenever we have 1 negative, our outcome is negative. So now let's try 2 negatives. Negative 1 times negative 1. That equals positive 1. So if we have 2 negatives, our outcome is going to be positive. So take a second and let's look for a pattern between how many negatives we have and the outcome of our problem. Without doing the math, if I have 3 negatives, can you guess what my outcome is going to be? My outcome is going to be negative. Following along with my pattern, will my outcome be negative or positive if I have 4 negative numbers? It's going to be positive. So let's think about a pattern that we have here. What I'm seeing is that every time we have an even number of negatives or we don't have any negatives, our answer is positive. Anytime we have an odd number of negatives, our answer comes out negative. So our pattern is that an odd amount of negatives will lead to a negative outcome. An even amount will lead to a positive outcome. Based off of that, let's look at our example. So we have negative 1 multiplied by itself 25 times. I know that 25 is an odd number. So based upon that, and looking at our rule up here, will negative 1 times negative 1 25 times, will it be positive 1 or negative 1? Our answer is going to be negative 1, because whenever we have an odd amount of negatives, we will get a negative outcome. So here's our multiplication rules. Let's think back to our chart to figure out what our rules are. So if we have 2 positive numbers, let's look back at our chart and see what's going to happen. So we have 2 positive numbers, which means we have an even number of positives. So that answer is going to be positive. Now for the next one, we have 1 positive and 1 negative. So 1 negative number is going to lead to a negative outcome. Now we have it in a different order. We have 1 negative and 1 positive. Once again, we have 1 negative, which means we have an odd number of negatives, so our outcome is negative. Lastly, we have 2 negatives. An even amount of negatives leads us to a positive answer. So let's look at our examples. 12 times 3. We have 2 positive numbers, so I automatically know that my answer is going to be positive. 12 times 3 is 36. This time I have 12 times negative 3. Is my outcome going to be positive or negative? Negative. 12 times negative 3 is negative 36. Let's do the third one. Negative 12 times 3. What does negative 12 times 3 equal? We have one negative number, so negative 12 times 3 is negative 36. Now we have two negatives. We know that two negatives is going to lead us to a positive outcome, so what is negative 12 times negative 3? Negative 12 times negative 3 is going to be a positive 36 because we have two negative numbers. Let's look at a few more examples. 5 times 4 is two positive numbers, so my answer is going to be positive. And 5 times 4 equals 20. Is this one going to be positive or negative? This answer is going to be negative because I have one negative. And negative 3 times positive 2 equals 6. What's negative 6 times negative 4? Make sure you look at how many negatives there are. Negative 6 times negative 4 is positive because there are two negatives, and it's positive 24. Now we have no negatives. We just have 7 times 3. What's 7 times 3? 7 times 3 is a positive 21. Lastly, we have two negatives. What's negative 8 times negative 9? Negative 8 times negative 9 is going to be positive because we have two negatives. When we have an even number of negatives, we have a positive answer. So negative 8 times negative 9 equals a positive 72. Okay, so here is what we're going to do next. We're going to do our practice problems on the back and take a break. We're going to review those practice problems. If you're in class with me, we're going to do a Kahoot. And lastly, we're going to do our IXL for the day, which is a 7th grade C15.